If you saw a woman standing by the side of the road, her tire flat under the burning sun, what would you do? Keep driving? Wait for someone else to stop? Or would you be the first to pull over? Caleb wasn't a cop. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man in a safety vest, on his way to a shift, carrying half a cold sandwich and a plastic water bottle. But the decision he made that afternoon changed the rest of his life, and not just his life. This is the story of a man with no title, no business card, no fame. But what he did made a CEO cry. It made an entire system rewrite the names it had forgotten, and it made thousands stop, not to rest, but to remember that kindness isn't a choice, it's a reflex. The September wind lashed down the highway like a silent warning. Little dust devils danced across the scorching pavement, only to be mercilessly flattened by passing tires. Afternoons in Utah often tasted dry, and this one carried the faint metallic scent of overheated steel, the kind of smell that could only come from a wheel rim scraped raw in near 100-degree heat. An old Buick sat stranded on the shoulder, its body coated in dust, its windshield bearing a faint crack on the left, like it too had been holding on longer than it should have. The woman who stepped out of the driver's seat looked to be somewhere past 60. Not elegant, not disheveled, just a slightly hunched frame, silver hair tucked neatly beneath a faded baseball cap. Her striped blue shirt had lost its color, her jeans were patched behind the knee, and her once white sneakers had turned a muted gray. She stood staring at the rear right tire, completely flat, collapsed as if defeated in some invisible race. She bent down, opened the trunk, and pulled out a tire repair kit. But her lightly trembling hands made it clear. This wasn't something she did often. Cars kept zipping by, sleek SUVs, bulky pickup trucks loaded with gear, flashy sports cars worth 10 times more than the aging Buick. No one stopped. No one turned around. A few glanced and looked away. A young woman in the passenger seat of a silver Range Rover snapped a photo of the broken-down car, giggled at the driver, and tapped quickly on her screen, probably preparing to post it. Maybe the caption read, "Survival Skills, 0.0." The older woman didn't lift her head. She kept rummaging through her toolkit, carefully, as if unpicking stitches from an old wound. Then a black Ford F-150 pickup truck slowed down. It braked hard a few meters ahead, reversed slightly, and came to a full stop. The woman turned her head as if holding on to a shred of hope. The truck door opened. A man stepped out, red polo shirt, sunglasses, hair neatly trimmed in a corporate cut. He looked at her for a moment. She gave a small nod, but before she could speak, he waved his hand dismissively. "Got a flat?" he asked in the tone of someone being bothered during an important meeting. "Yes, my tire's flat. I'm trying to—" "Then call roadside assistance." The man cut her off, smirking. "People still change their own tires these days? What is this? The 50s? His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. It dropped somewhere between disdain and derision, like her presence was ruining the clean aesthetic of the open road. As he turned to get back into his truck, he tossed out one more line that made the air feel even heavier. "If you can't afford to maintain your car, maybe don't drive it." He climbed in, slammed the door, and sped off, leaving behind a trail of dust, and the woman's eyes frozen on the horizon as if she'd just been slapped and hadn't yet figured out how to react. A few minutes later, an old sedan rolled quietly toward the shoulder. No shine, no engine roar, just a four-door car that had likely passed through many hands. Caleb sat behind the wheel. He was about 27, slim, with deep brown skin. He wore an earth-toned t-shirt and faded khaki pants. On the passenger seat was a canvas bag with the logo of the convenience store where he worked morning shifts. He turned off the engine and stepped out without saying a word. Calm, no rush. He walked over, checked the tire's condition, then looked up and asked in a voice as gentle as a late summer breeze, "Do you need some help?" The woman paused, caught off guard. Maybe from surprise, maybe because she had long since stopped hoping. "I'm trying to put on the spare, but I'm not sure I have the strength." Caleb said nothing more. He knelt down, inspected each lug nut with care, and began to remove the flat. Not a word about it. No glance around for cameras. No expectation of credit. He wasn't looking to be noticed. He just felt it was the right thing to do. His hands bore calluses. A long scratch marked his wrist, likely from manual labor, not some weekend sport. A while later, almost finished, he returned to his car and rummaged through a paper bag. He pulled out 2 cheese sandwiches wrapped in newspaper. I don't know if you've eaten anything, but I've got 2. If you don't mind. She accepted the sandwich like someone receiving a letter no one remembered to send. Then she softly asked, "Why did you stop?" Caleb smiled faintly. I hate the feeling of being left behind, especially when you need someone the most. He didn't know, nor did he need to know, who she was, and that was exactly what made her go silent. Off in the distance, a dash cam on a passing truck quietly recorded the entire scene. No one knew it would become a viral video later. No one knew the woman was hiding a secret that could change the entire town, and Caleb's life. But in that moment, everything was wrapped up in a single tire changed, a sandwich shared, and a young man who still believed that kindness didn't need a reason. Caleb leaned against the Buick whose tire he'd just replaced, wiping oil smudges from his palms with a small cloth. He hadn't left yet. On the driver's seat of his own car, the paper lunch bag from the convenience store still sat untouched. Not because he'd forgotten, but because he was waiting for the older woman to eat first. To someone else, it might have seemed like a simple act of politeness. But for Caleb, there was something about this woman that made him hesitate to leave. Not curiosity, certainly not expectation. It was something in her eyes when she accepted the sandwich. Something beyond gratitude. Something quieter. As if she was carrying something inside and trying hard not to let it show. The woman took a small bite, then stopped, eyes fixed on the space in front of her. Perhaps it was the horizon where dust merged with sunlight. Perhaps it was the crack in the windshield reflecting her own silhouette. After a while, she turned to Caleb. Her gaze was gentler now, but her question carried unexpected weight. Do you live around here? Caleb nodded, one hand resting on his steering wheel. About 4 miles away. My mom has a heart condition, so I can't go far. I do a bit of everything to keep things afloat. Mornings I do deliveries, afternoons I'm at the shop. No set schedule, but enough to get by. She nodded too, asked nothing more, chewed quietly. No pity in her expression, no praise either. Just acceptance, like someone used to living more than speaking. Caleb fell silent for a moment. Then, as if remembering something, he reached into a side pocket of his car door and pulled out a blue plastic water bottle. It was a little worn, the label peeling off at the corner, but clean and full. I'm not sure if you've got water, but in this heat, it's easy to get dehydrated. She took it. No fuss, no performance. Just a soft smile before sipping slowly. A few moments passed. Then she set the bottle on the car's hood and spoke. This time, her voice lower, as if saying something she hadn't planned to. You know you just saved someone's life, right? Caleb frowned slightly. She continued, still staring out at the endless road. If no one had stopped today, if that tire hadn't been changed, I might have started walking the other way and, well, who knows what would have happened. Caleb tilted his head, about to ask something, but she raised a hand gently. No need. Not because she was hiding anything, but because she understood some things are best left behind. The silence stretched for a few beats before Caleb replied, his voice calm yet firm. In that case, I'm glad I stopped. There was no smugness in his tone, no moral superiority. Just the simple words of someone who didn't overthink doing what's right. For the first time, the woman lifted her head fully. Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if studying something deeper beneath his surface. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all distance. It was closer now, a kind of quiet intimacy that only forms between two strangers who've just gone through something unnamed together. Most people help when someone's watching. You're one of the rare ones who helps when no one is. Caleb smiled, this time a bit sheepishly. I just did what I hoped someone would do for my mom if she were in trouble. The woman nodded again, said nothing more, but it was clear something had shifted in her gaze, as if she'd just found a piece of something lost long ago. She turned back to the driver's seat, opened the glove compartment, and took out a white business card, but paused. She looked at it for just a second, only a second, then placed it back inside and closed the compartment. Instead, she reached for a small notebook, tore out a page, scribbled a few words in shaky but deliberate handwriting, folded it, and handed it to Caleb. "If you ever need anything, call this number. No need to ask my name." Caleb accepted it, a little confused but didn't press. He didn't know who she was, and by this point, he didn't think it mattered. She needed help, and he helped. That was all. A semi-truck roared by, its horn blaring, making them both jump slightly. Caleb glanced at his watch. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. He had to get back for his next shift. His mom still needed her meds. He looked at the woman one last time, ready to say goodbye, but she spoke first. "Thank you, not for fixing the car, but for reminding me that not everyone's forgotten how to stop." Caleb nodded, then said softly, "Sometimes you don't need to do something big. You just need to pull over." She nodded in return, didn't smile, didn't cry, but her eyes, those had changed, as if a small door had just creaked open after being locked for years. Caleb drove off, not in a hurry, didn't look back, and the woman stood there, watching him go, her hand still holding the water bottle he had left behind on her hood. She didn't call after him, didn't run, just quietly carried the bottle into her car, placed it beside her, as if preserving a living artifact of kindness. She started the engine, slowly pulled off the shoulder, and merged back into traffic. No one knew who she was. No one saw her again. But that moment and that boy had imprinted themselves in her memory in a way nothing could erase. An hour later, at a gas station 30 miles away, Eleanor Whitmore, chairwoman of the largest transportation infrastructure conglomerate in the American West, pulled over, took a small notebook from her purse and opened to the page with Caleb's number. She didn't call. She just looked, then closed it again. In her rearview mirror, she caught her own reflection. Older, perhaps, but also clearer than ever. In her eyes now wasn't a multi-million-dollar CEO, but a woman the world had once turned its back on, who'd just been reminded by a nameless young man that some people still know how to stop. And that would change everything. Eleanor Whitmore pulled into the narrow parking lot behind an old gas station on the western edge of the Salt Flats Valley. This station wasn't on any city's development map. It was the forgotten edge of the grid, a place people passed through only to fuel up and move on. No stopping, no questions. Eleanor sat in the car for several minutes, engine still running. The AC quietly hummed, sending cool air across her face, but her expression remained unchanged, still, unmoved, only her eyes shifting slightly, tracing the cracks on the windshield as if each fracture were a question without an answer. She reached for the glove box and took out a photograph. A man, silver-haired and tall, standing on an unfinished highway with a craft paper blueprint in hand. Her husband, Richard Whitmore, the man who had built Whitmore Infrastructure with her from nothing. No one knew he had personally pitched every investor, drawn the first routes himself, and spent over 20 years studying how to connect small towns with modern infrastructure. He hated the spotlight. He didn't like being called the boss. He preferred the connector. But it was that very man, the connector, who had been abandoned by the very system he believed in. 3 years ago, on Route 318, just 42 miles from where Caleb had stopped today, Richard had a roadside accident while inspecting a landslide zone. His brakes failed, and the car slid into a ditch. His phone had no signal. In the passenger seat sat an emergency signal kit, but the seatbelt jammed and he couldn't reach it. According to the official report from Highway Patrol, at least 8 vehicles passed by his stranded car over nearly 40 minutes. No one stopped. No one called. No one thought the car with a sagging tire was a sign of crisis. The only passerby who acknowledged the car was a truck driver who live-streamed on TikTok about some old man blocking the road, a clip that got over 130,000 views in 2 hours. By the time rescue crews arrived, Richard was still breathing. But it was too late. Too late to save him. Too late to ask why no one helped. Too late for him to say the one thing he had promised never to leave unsaid. To Eleanor, the woman he swore he would never leave alone. His death didn't just steal a husband. It tore apart the trust they had placed in the system they had built together. Eleanor didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't face the media. She didn't deliver a eulogy. She simply placed a small leather-bound journal atop his casket, the one he used to mark potential stop points for humanitarian stations along the new highways. And after the funeral, she vanished. Months later, Whitmore Infrastructure's board was informed that Chairwoman Eleanor would be temporarily stepping away from in-person meetings to focus on field research. No one knew that research meant a series of quiet, disguised journeys, each one placing herself in the shoes of those the system had forgotten. The first time she posed as a stranded driver, she stood on a mountain pass so cold her knees trembled, just to see if anyone would stop in less than ideal conditions. No one did. The second time, she dressed as a homeless woman, standing by a rest stop. A family of 4 walked past. The little girl turned to offer her a water bottle, but her mother pulled her away, saying, "Don't touch those people." Eleanor didn't blame them. She just took notes. Each time she wasn't looking for dramatic rescue. Just one thing, someone who would stop. And then today in Utah, she met Caleb. There were no cameras, no media campaign, no secret crew filming like in some reality show. Just an old car, a lonely woman, and a young man who got out without knowing who she was. It was that not knowing that mattered most. Caleb didn't need a reason to help, didn't need credentials, didn't need reward. And precisely because of that, he, the one the system ignored, a man of color juggling odd jobs to survive, was the only one who still recognized when a person needed someone to stop for who they were. Eleanor documented the entire encounter in her brown leather journal. She didn't just record the events. She wrote about the rhythm of her heartbeat when she saw Caleb open the trunk. She noted his eyes when he handed over half a sandwich. She described the feeling when he bowed his head to thank her, not knowing he'd just made the first crack in the emotional glacier she had built around herself for 3 years. She closed the journal, and in that moment, Eleanor was no longer a lost woman by the highway. She became Eleanor Whitmore again, the woman who once dreamed of highways not just to make cars move faster, but to bring people closer. She started the engine, pressed the gas, and merged back into traffic. But her mind was no longer filled with zoning maps or contractor bids. Instead, it held one simple question. If Richard had met Caleb that day, would he still be alive? And from that question, a new idea took shape. Not an investment idea, but a quiet revolution. Not to assign blame, but to prove that the very system that had failed her husband could be rebuilt from the people it once discarded. And Caleb would be the first piece. Not a symbol of kindness, but living proof that when everyone turns away, sometimes all it takes is one person who stops to change everything. Federal Route 315 cut through the western semi-desert like a cold blade, slicing the barren landscape into 2 opposing halves, one side lined with jagged gray cliffs like thorns, the other an open prairie overrun with dry grass and scattered cacti. Scattered rest stops dotted the road like faint freckles on sun-scorched skin. In this dry, relentless terrain, people learned to live fast, drive fast, and avoid anything that might slow them down, even if that meant an old woman with a flat tire by the roadside. That was exactly what Eleanor Whitmore had set out to test. Not the speed of the cars, but the speed of conscience. She drove the route for 5 days, choosing a different spot each day, changing clothes, posture, hairstyle, even her voice. Sometimes she played the stranded driver. Other times she posed as a mother searching for a missing child. One day she wore a hoodie and clutched a torn suitcase while standing silently at the shoulder. Her notes were divided into 3 columns: number of vehicles that passed, number of people who looked, and number of people who actually stopped. By the end of the 5th day, over 2,000 vehicles had passed. Number of people who stopped: 0. What struck Eleanor wasn't surprise, but pain. Not because no one helped, but because no one seemed to believe anymore that a stranger in need might truly be in need. They assumed she must be acting. It could be a trap. If I stop, I might get scammed. So better to keep moving. A collective suspicion had turned kindness into a liability. Anyone who stopped was either foolish or reckless. Eleanor didn't blame them. In fact, she remembered a moment back in 2011 when she herself drove past a man holding a cardboard sign that read, "Need help." She only turned back after driving more than 3 miles. At the time, she thought she was simply protecting herself. But now she understood. If everyone thinks that way, then what happens to those who truly need help? What if one of the people abandoned was someone you loved? On Friday afternoon, Eleanor returned to the place where she had met Caleb. She parked in the exact same spot, this time wearing thick fur-lined clothing and leather gloves. Even though it was nearly 90 degrees, she just sat in the car, eyes locked on the spot where she had stood the week before, hands trembling slightly from the fear that maybe the memory was just a beautiful exception, a moment too good to be real. She opened her notebook and flipped to the page titled, Caleb, the One Who Stopped. Beneath it she wrote in shaky handwriting, the only one who didn't assume. She remembered every small detail of Caleb, how he opened the trunk slowly, without looking around, without rushing. How he silently checked the tire pressure with his hand, as if he'd done it for others before. And how he offered the sandwich not with pity, but as a quiet ritual, a way to say, I'm not here to judge, I'm here to be present. She knew people like him weren't common, but Eleanor needed to know. Was he truly the last? So she continued. Over the next 6 days, she staged more elaborate tests. One day she placed a hidden camera to record people's reactions when they saw an elderly woman collapsed beside a stalled car on hot pavement. On another, she pretended to be a mother carrying an infant, dropping a bag of baby formula in the middle of a crossing, just to see who might stop and help. The results remained the same. One young woman stopped her car, only to take a picture from afar and post it on Instagram with the caption, Granny on the Run. A man in business attire stepped out of his car just to ask if she needed an Uber. When she told him she didn't have a smartphone, he said, Sorry, I have a meeting, and left. A delivery driver looked like he was about to stop, but then got a call from his supervisor, made a U-turn, and drove off, leaving a trail of dust and rap music behind. Eleanor began to wonder, was Caleb the last person still capable of seeing another human being? Then one early morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the lower ridge, she saw a man in a wheelchair stuck in a drainage groove by the road. She stopped, for the first time, not to test, but to help. The man looked up, his wrinkled eyes marked with decades of wear, gave her a small nod and said something that froze her in place. Thanks. Sooner or later, someone always stops. Today it was you. That sentence felt like a reversal of everything. She hadn't been testing others. She had been the one on trial. Caleb wasn't a miracle. Caleb was someone who had never unlearned the habit of stopping, a habit Eleanor once had, and had lost somewhere along the road. When she returned to the regional office in Salt Lake, Eleanor called a meeting of the internal community development team for the first time in over 2 years. She didn't present financial reports. She didn't talk about projections or contracts. She simply placed a printed photo on the table, an image from a truck's dash cam that happened to capture the moment Caleb bent down to change a tire. Then she said, We're not building rest stops to sell gas, coffee, or advertising anymore. We're building a place to preserve the people who still know how to stop, and it will be named after Caleb. No one objected. Some looked confused. A few thought she was joking, but Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. In the quiet room, she told them about Richard, about the road that left him behind, about the time she stood at the roadside, ignored like a senile old woman. And finally, she told them about Caleb, the only person who stopped when there was no reason to, except for the simple reason that he still believed in decency. No one sat quite the same after that. Some looked down, some sighed, and some began to realize, this system doesn't need more speed. It needs brakes. Caleb returned to the convenience store at nearly 3 in the afternoon, almost an hour late for his shift. He entered through the back door, circling past the stock area to avoid the direct glare of the manager. But that didn't mean he'd avoid the consequences. The manager, Rita, a middle-aged woman with a habit of wearing red-framed glasses and a hair clip that looked like a binder clip, had been waiting since 1:30. When Caleb placed his bag on the shelf and stepped into the work area, Rita didn't speak at first. She glanced at him briefly but kept her eyes fixed on the security monitor. It wasn't until he touched the register to check the shift log that she cleared her throat, her voice stiff as compressed wood. You're 46 minutes late. According to store policy, arriving more than 10 minutes late without prior notice results in loss of pay for the day and no shift credit. Caleb opened his mouth, but Rita continued. I don't need a reason. Don't say car trouble. Don't say traffic. Just remember, this is a workplace, not a place to show how nice you are. Caleb swallowed hard. He didn't say that he'd just helped a stranger on the side of a highway. He didn't say that it was an elderly woman alone with a blown tire. He didn't say he had shared his last sandwich with her. Because in this place, stories like that held no value. They couldn't be converted into work hours. They didn't go into the reward log. And they certainly wouldn't help him cover his mother's medication for the coming month. When his shift began, Caleb returned to work as usual, checking expiration dates on refrigerated items, wiping down product shelves, and trying to smile at customers who never looked him in the eye. Every movement was routine, practiced, like a system pre-programmed long ago. But today, something was different. His heart felt heavier, not because of the pay cut, not exactly because of Rita's coldness either, but because of the feeling that doing the right thing had led to a chain of wrong consequences in the eyes of others. It was like learning a distorted lesson. The kinder you are, the more you lose. And that was a lesson Caleb never wanted to learn, but society insisted he memorize. At the end of the shift, while packing unsold inventory, his phone buzzed. A message from the health insurance provider. His mother's medication request had been denied due to insufficient financial documentation for support eligibility, which meant that this month he would have to pay the full cost himself, and that was money he didn't have. Caleb sat quietly in the stockroom, beside a stack of empty cardboard boxes and the bleach shelf. His hand gripped his old phone so tightly the screen dimmed with sweat. He thought of his mother, Helen, the woman who had been a nurse for over 30 years, treating patients as if they were her own children. The woman who hadn't left his father's bedside for the last 8 months of his life. The woman who now relied on oxygen support every night, because the healthcare system billed oxygen like a luxury, not a basic human right. And now he couldn't afford her medicine, just because that morning he chose to do the right thing. Around 8 p.m., Caleb left the store. He said nothing to anyone, didn't look at Rita, didn't greet the coworkers laughing behind the counter. On his way home, he stopped at a small gas station and bought 3 packs of instant noodles, 1 cheap bottle of milk, and a box of generic painkillers, the lowest dose. The total was $12.64. He had $15 left in his wallet. When he handed over the money, the cashier, a teenage boy with headphones on, didn't even look up. Caleb didn't blame him. That boy was just living like everyone else, not looking, not listening, not stopping. Back at home, he opened the door with an old key and stepped into a small second-floor apartment in a low-income complex. Inside, the lights were dim, and his mother was asleep. Her breathing was steady but faint, occasionally broken. He sat on the edge of her bed, watching her for a while. Then he gently picked up a note clipped to an old pillbox. Payment units insufficient. Please contact Assistance Center on Monday. Caleb held the note for a moment, then set it on the table. Beside it was the small piece of paper Eleanor, the woman he'd helped, had given him days before. He picked it up and looked at the handwritten number. No name, no message, just numbers alone. He'd thought about calling, several times, but each time he put it down. Not out of pride, but because he had never helped someone expecting anything in return. To him, being kind meant not needing a name, not needing credit, just doing it when no one else would, and he didn't want to break that. But when his mother began coughing in her sleep, long, dry, strained coughs, he had to lift her gently, pat her back, pour her water, hold the oxygen tank tighter. He knew. Maybe it was time to break that rule, not for himself, but for the one who had given everything for him. He slipped the note back into his pocket, like a last card to play on a worse day. That night, Caleb didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the yellow streetlights spill across the silent road. The city street at this hour looked no different than the highway that afternoon, wide, long, empty, and indifferent. Caleb wondered, if he hadn't stopped that day, would anyone else have? And if not, then what would have happened? He didn't need to know who the woman was, where she lived, or how much money she had, but he needed to know that his kindness hadn't been crushed under the boots of a world obsessed with numbers. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, in a different place, Eleanor was also awake. She sat in her satellite office in the Salt Flats region, staring at a map filled with red markers, each one representing someone who didn't stop. Only one box was green, handwritten beside it, Caleb, Friday, 1:42 p.m. She looked at that box the way someone might look at a sprout breaking through drought-hardened soil. And she knew, sometimes one person stopping is all it takes to plant hope again. Mornings in South Terrace usually began with the blare of school bus horns and the echo of barking dogs from apartments lining the curb. Caleb's apartment sat on the second floor, at the far end of the row, overlooking the shared parking lot, where every parking space bore old oil stains and faded stripes. That morning when Caleb stepped out of his home, he wasn't planning to go to work. The store had cut his shift. Rita had texted him around midnight. Temporary budget cuts mean we're reducing hours? Not surprising, but it still twisted his gut with pressure. His mother was still in bed, coughing lightly but not yet needing daytime oxygen. He had quietly made some oatmeal, left it beside her with a note scribbled in pencil. The apartment was so silent he could hear his own footsteps as he left. Caleb planned to walk 12 blocks to the public library to use the computer and check the status of their health insurance application. But he never made it there. Because the moment he stepped out of the apartment complex entrance, he saw it. A gray-black SUV parked directly across the street, front end facing the building, engine off, but someone sitting in the driver's seat. A woman sitting straight-backed, wearing a sleek brown suit, her silver hair pulled tightly into a bun, sunglasses with thin golden frames, the kind only people in power wear, able to obscure what they're watching while appearing to see everything. Caleb stopped in his tracks. There was something familiar in her silhouette, and then she stepped out. The hair, the face, the smile, and the voice. This time not shaky, not tired, but steady and clear. The voice of someone who had stood at podiums for decades. "Good morning, Caleb." He didn't respond right away. His mind had to step back a few paces, trying to match the memory of the stranded woman on the highway with the figure standing in front of him now. But they didn't align. The woman before him was too different. Every step was precise, every movement deliberate. She was no longer someone in need of help. She was someone arriving to offer it or to deliver something monumental. Caleb hesitated, nodding slightly. I'm sorry, are you? Eleanor smiled. Not arrogantly, not performatively, just honestly. I'm the woman with the flat tire last week, the one you shared your last sandwich with. Caleb didn't know what to say. He nodded again, then again. Eleanor stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. I owe you a thank you that I can't give with a text message or a check. Caleb froze a little. He didn't know why, but he felt nervous, like something bigger than himself was forming around him. He said softly, I didn't help to get anything back. I just did what I thought was right. Eleanor nodded. And that's exactly why I'm here. No one in the complex knew what was happening. A few elderly residents from the upstairs balconies looked down, quietly speculating. Was she a government agent? A health inspector? Someone from a charity? Caleb still didn't understand. Eleanor motioned toward her SUV. Just a short ride. I promise I'll bring you back. And if you don't want to hear anything, I'll turn around immediately. He nodded, not because he instantly trusted her, but because he was curious, and because her eyes didn't carry the intent to harm. The SUV rolled out of the complex. Caleb didn't ask. Eleanor didn't explain right away. She turned on the radio, just low enough to hear. A local station was broadcasting a segment on an upcoming memorial along a highway, the very stretch where Caleb had stopped to help her. Eleanor turned it off. Then she spoke. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm the chairwoman of Whitmore Infrastructure, the company that owns and operates over 4,200 miles of privately maintained highways across the U.S. Caleb turned his head slowly to look at her, but she didn't pause. 3 years ago, my husband, the co-founder of this company, died in an accident on one of our roads. No one helped him. Even though at least 8 cars drove by, no one stopped. Her voice was calm, not choked, not theatrical. She had told this story before. But this time was different. She wasn't retelling a tragedy. She was leading toward a purpose. Caleb remained silent. He didn't interrupt. Eleanor continued, I disappeared from the press, stepped away from the board, and I started my own kind of survey, not with spreadsheets, but by standing on the side of the road. I wanted to see how many people still know how to stop. The answer? Only one. The SUV pulled over at a wide overlook on the highway's edge, where the road stretched endlessly into the horizon. Eleanor got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out a thick folder. She handed it to Caleb. Inside is the full proposal for a new project I'm about to launch. A free rest stop. No commercial branding, just a place to help those who've been left behind. It'll offer rest, clean water, basic medical services, charging stations, and emergency shuttles. Every one of these stops will be named after the first person who stopped, for another human being. Not for glory, not for money. She looked him in the eyes. The first one will be named after you, if you agree. Caleb opened the file. On the cover, in bold print, Project Caleb Station. He didn't know what to say. It felt like a dream. He turned to her, unsure. I only changed a tire. Eleanor shook her head. Her smile softened. No, Caleb, you made me stop. And to me, that's far greater than you stopping for me. Caleb didn't know how long he had been sitting still in the SUV, parked in the open stillness of a grassy ridge near the highway's edge. Dry winds swept across the sparse field, lifting fine dust that swirled gently against the windshield. The whole world seemed to recede, leaving room for just two people. A young man who had just learned a rest stop would carry his name, and a woman who had lost far more than she had ever said. Eleanor placed her hand on the steering wheel. She didn't turn the key. She didn't move. Then she began to speak, slow and low, like someone brushing dust off the pages of a locked journal. They said Richard died in an accident, but the truth is, he died because he was forgotten. Caleb turned his head. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, eyes unmoving, as if looking through the glass into a day that had never truly passed. Richard wasn't careless. He always triple-checked before driving. He never let the fuel level drop below half a tank. That day, he went out to inspect a new route being planned for an emergency response corridor. There was a dip in the road that flooded often when it rained. He wanted to see it himself instead of waiting for the survey team's report. That was Richard. He didn't trust numbers unless he saw it with his own eyes. I remember that morning. It was foggy. I saw him out the door. We had this habit, blinking 3 times when saying goodbye. He smiled, said he'd call once he cleared the ridge. He didn't call. 1 hour, then 2. I thought he was busy. By lunchtime, his phone still hadn't rung. I called. No answer. I called his assistant. No idea. I called the highway emergency line. No incident reported. No one had reported a car pulled over. That's when the cold began. Not outside, inside, in my chest. That strange sensation. I called 10 more places. No one knew. No one saw. No one stopped. Eleanor pulled an old plastic ID badge from her pocket. This is Richard's ID from that day. When they found him, it was still around his neck. The rescue team arrived 48 minutes after my first call. A truck driver was the only person who mentioned the car, but only after posting a video on TikTok. It got thousands of likes. People thought it was funny. Some old man napping on the roadside. Caleb's body stiffened. Eleanor placed the badge on the dashboard. He was still alive when they reached him, but he passed away 2 hours later. If someone had stopped in the first 10 minutes, just one person, Caleb, maybe he'd still be here. No tears, no crack in her voice, just the icy stillness of someone who had moved beyond pain, into the silence that follows it. Caleb turned to her, searching for something to say, but no words felt worthy. Eleanor continued. After the funeral, I vanished from the media. Everyone assumed I was grieving. They weren't wrong. But it wasn't just losing him that broke me. It was realizing that the very system I helped build was the first to turn its back on the man I loved. She opened the glove compartment, pulled out an old faded folder, and handed it to Caleb. This is the original proposal Richard wrote for a humanitarian rest stop system. It was never implemented. They said it wasn't financially viable. We shelved it. And then he died. Not because of a crash, but because he was erased from the model he believed in. Caleb took it, his hands slightly trembling. Inside, the pages outlined a rest stop design, detailed and compassionate. Sleeping spaces, basic medical supplies, free water stations, shelter zones during emergencies. It mirrored exactly what he had seen in the new Caleb Station proposal. Eleanor looked at him. I've lived 3 years with the question, if I hadn't agreed to put that plan aside, would Richard still be alive? Caleb tightened his grip on the folder. Eleanor placed her hand gently over his. But you've given me a chance to make it right. Caleb, you don't know what you've done. You didn't just change a tire. You altered the course of an entire system. The SUV started moving again. Neither of them spoke for a long stretch of road. Caleb finally took a deep breath and said, for the first time since her story began, I didn't think I did anything big. I just thought, if it were my mom, I'd want someone to do the same. Eleanor nodded slightly. You don't see yourself as a hero, but the world needs more people who don't see themselves as heroes and still choose to stop. The SUV turned down a side road that curved away from the highway, leading into an open lot. There, a small team of engineers was surveying, placing markers, setting up signposts. A project board had been erected, its lettering bold and clear. Whitmore Infrastructure, Site 001, Caleb Station, Phase 1. Caleb stared, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Eleanor stopped the car. This is the first site. From here we scale outward, but this one will always carry your name. No one can change that. Caleb remained quiet. The wind picked up, scattering dust and the scent of freshly turned earth. He stepped out of the SUV standing before the site, not filled with machines or noise, just lines of stakes and people working carefully. But to him it felt like a monument, not to himself, but to everyone who had ever been left behind. Caleb stood in front of the temporary sign for Caleb Station, Phase 1, as if the letters weren't real. He glanced over at the workers in protective gear hammering stakes, measuring land, erecting frames. None of them knew that the man whose name they were building around was standing just a few steps away, wearing a simple t-shirt and shoes with worn-down heels. Eleanor didn't say a word in that moment. She simply let him stand there, eyes following every movement, every strike of a hammer, every line of chalk etched across the dry earth, as if she knew he needed time to believe that what was happening was real. A soft wind stirred, carrying fine dust and the scent of fresh paint from the makeshift signage. Caleb turned to her, voice slow but steady. I don't understand. I'm just a regular person, an hourly worker. Why me? Eleanor smiled, not quickly, not to flatter, not to inflate him, but simply looked him in the eyes and said calmly, exactly because you think of yourself as ordinary. That's what makes you extraordinary. Caleb didn't answer right away. He sat down on a wooden bench at the edge of the construction site, looking over the design layout spread out on a temporary table. Everything was planned with care. Hydration points, rest areas, medical posts, even an emergency vehicle entrance. There were no ads, no coffee shop logos or gas station signs, only simple icons. An open hand, a seat, a water droplet. He pointed to a corner on the map. What's this area? Eleanor stepped closer, following his finger. That's the holding zone, a place to store lost items, help people waiting for transport, reconnect with loved ones, or simply sit without being asked why. Caleb looked at her, trying to see if she was truly serious, but her eyes didn't shift. I used to live in a place where standing too long meant someone would ask, "What are you doing here?" And I know how it feels to have no space where you're not an inconvenience. Eleanor nodded gently. I know. That's why we need you. He gave a small, incredulous laugh, not out of sarcasm, but because he couldn't believe someone like her had just said, we need you. Eleanor reached into her coat and handed him a thin folder. Inside was an official letter from Whitmore Infrastructure, offering Caleb the role of honorary advisor for community and humanitarian affairs for the Caleb Station project. There was no rigid job description, no time commitment, but there was a monthly stipend, a separate account set up for his mother, and the right to give input on the design, implementation, and operation of every station modeled after this one. Caleb looked at the bolded line. Because you stopped when no one else did. He flipped to the next page, a handwritten letter from Eleanor. Her handwriting was firm, aligned. Not long, just a few lines. Caleb, I didn't choose you because you're an expert. I chose you because you're evidence. And this world needs evidence like that to remember what it used to be. Caleb closed his eyes. A long breath left his chest like something heavy he hadn't even known he was holding. When he opened them again, he looked at her and asked, "If I say yes, what would I have to do?" Eleanor didn't elaborate, didn't over-explain. She simply answered, "You just have to keep being yourself." Caleb froze, then smiled. Not a smile of joy, but the kind of smile from someone who realizes they don't have to change to be seen. They're seen because they never changed. When they left the site, Eleanor drove Caleb back to his apartment. On the way, she handed him a sealed envelope. "This is the first payment. For your mother. No repayment, no strings. Just a gift from someone who once stood roadside with a flat tire." Caleb accepted it. He didn't look inside. He just held it tight. When they arrived, she didn't get out of the car. But before he left, she said, "Caleb, I can't promise the world will get better overnight. But I promise we'll begin with the first station, and you are its first light." He stood there watching the SUV pull away, dust rising gently, unhurried. In his pocket was the invitation. In his hand was a gift for his mother. But in his heart was something greater. The feeling that, for the first time, the kindness he once thought was invisible had left a mark that couldn't be erased. On Wednesday morning, just 3 days after the sign for Caleb's station, Phase 1 went up, an old video unexpectedly resurfaced on TikTok. In it, a young woman dressed in gym gear sat in the passenger seat of a silver Range Rover, giggling as she held her phone out the window to record an elderly woman struggling to change a tire under the hot sun. The caption, in bold white font, read, "Survival Skills, Zero." The clip was only 13 seconds long, but the mockery in her voice and the ridicule in her laughter made it go viral last year, racking up over 400,000 likes within the first 2 days. At the time, no one knew who had filmed it, just another cruel piece of entertainment among countless others. But now everything was different. A small Twitter user stitched the video together with a more recent clip. Eleanor, dressed in her brown executive suit, stepping out of a gray SUV and walking toward the Caleb Station construction site. The tweet read, "That old woman in the video? She's the CEO of Whitmore Infrastructure. That girl in the car? Laugh all you want. She's deleting her accounts now." The post spread within hours. Online sleuths quickly uncovered the identity of the original TikTok user, a fitness coach based in Nevada, previously sponsored by several brands. The brands swiftly pulled their partnerships. The woman posted an apology claiming, "I didn't know she was the CEO," only to be met with a cold, unified response across comments. "You didn't need to know her title to be decent." That was just the beginning. As news of Caleb Station spread, another video gained traction. A clip from a truck's dash cam showing Caleb bending down to replace Eleanor's tire. There was no sound, just images. Caleb removing his coat, moving the flat tire aside, and handing her a bottle of water. An Instagram account posted the footage with a single caption in white letters, "The only one who stopped." A prominent journalist shared it, then local news picked it up. Within 72 hours, the hashtag # Caleb Station appeared over 3 million times. But few talked about Caleb himself. They talked about the system. They quoted Eleanor from her closed-door interview with Business Review. "I didn't choose Caleb because he applied. I chose him because he never asked." Whitmore Infrastructure launched no official media campaign, no press release, just a quiet update on their website. Caleb Station, Phase 1 under construction. No photos, no fanfare. But those who had mocked Eleanor, denied Caleb, turned her away from the grocery store, or looked the other way when someone needed help, began to see their names quietly vanish from rosters. In a Whitmore board meeting, one senior executive, who had previously opposed the nonprofit station idea for its lack of commercial value, suddenly resigned. No announcement, no explanation. But industry insiders knew he'd been removed from Eleanor's new project ecosystem. As for Caleb, things moved slower. He had no idea the video was going viral. He didn't know thousands of people were resharing his image as a symbol. He still bought medicine for his mother, still paid the electric bill with crumpled $20 bills. But people began to recognize him, not out of admiration, but because they feared seeing themselves reflected in his eyes. Rita, the former manager at the convenience store, abruptly took leave after a coworker mentioned Caleb's name. She had once scolded him in front of customers for being 10 minutes late. Now she couldn't bear to face him in the store she once ordered him to clean, like he was invisible. Caleb said nothing about it. He didn't post, didn't retaliate, didn't speak out. He quietly removed himself from the shift schedule and never went back. One afternoon, Eleanor sent a small wooden box to Caleb's apartment. No name, no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. Someone who once laughed now sits in silence. Beneath it, a VIP card cleanly cut in half. It was a membership from an exclusive golf club that once denied Eleanor access to a private lounge during one of her undercover visits. The manager who had dismissed her based on her modest appearance had since resigned. No one forced him. No scandal broke. He simply no longer felt comfortable sitting in a room that Eleanor, the CEO of the entire system, might walk into at any moment. In a closed meeting with regional directors, Eleanor said only one thing: "I don't need anyone to bow and apologize. I just need them to stop laughing." And that's exactly what was happening. Silence was spreading like a strange form of justice. Not through courtrooms, not through media storms, not through shouting, but by quietly withdrawing presence, removing privilege, and replacing entitlement with a stillness called decency. For Caleb, each day brought something new: invitations to speak, offers to write memoirs, requests for interviews. He declined most of them. When asked why, he simply said, "I haven't done anything worth talking about." But it was precisely that humility that made people respect him more. They began to see the person once deemed a nobody was now quietly laying the foundation for a more humane system. Not through power, but through principle. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, while Caleb was helping his mother fold laundry in their small second-floor apartment, a large envelope appeared at the door. No stamp, no return address, just a single handwritten line. "Open this only if you still believe." Caleb picked it up and opened it silently. Inside was a stack of 5 pages, each one a profile of a person from a different state. All had one thing in common: they had stopped, not because they were filmed, not for reward, but because someone needed them in a moment when no one else dared to act. The first page told the story of Rosa Hernandez, a Mexican-American woman living in El Paso. She worked the night shift as a janitor at a highway gas station. 3 months earlier, while cleaning a restroom, she found an elderly man unconscious in one of the stalls. She didn't call the police first. She called emergency medical services. By the time the ambulance arrived, the man was out of danger. He was a veteran with no ID, no insurance. But because Rosa made the right call to the right people, he was treated in time. She never told anyone. She didn't post about it. She didn't ask for thanks. Eleanor had tracked her down, wearing a ball cap and posing as a traveler, and simply said, "I want to ask you about a night 3 months ago." Rosa didn't remember at first, but when Eleanor described every detail, Rosa was silent for a long time. Then she said, "I just thought anyone would have done what I did." Eleanor answered, "I've asked hundreds of people." No one did. The second page described George Whitlow, an elderly widower in Montana. Every weekend, he placed a plastic chair by the roadside to hand out cold water to hikers and cyclists. No signs, no donation boxes, no explanation. One day, a runaway child fleeing an abusive stepfather stumbled into his care. George fed the child, let them sleep, then took them to Child Protective Services. When asked why he didn't call the police first, George replied, "I didn't think she needed the police. She needed someone to believe her." No newspapers wrote about George. Eleanor found him because of a single anonymous comment buried in a small online forum. "If anyone remembers the old man who gave out water near Lolo Pass, I hope he's still okay." The next profiles? A young delivery driver named Alexis in Chicago, who reversed her van when she saw a homeless man shivering in the snow and left him a pair of gloves and a $10 bill. A young man named Devontae in Jacksonville who walked an elderly woman home for nearly an hour after she forgot her address. A single mother in Oregon named Mary Lou, who had been mocked as too trusting for letting a stranger use her shower because the girl had nowhere else to sleep. Eleanor had visited each of them. None knew who she was. None recognized her title the first time they met. And each time she offered help or recognition, they declined. They hadn't done it to be thanked. They had acted simply because they still saw people as human. That night, Eleanor called Caleb. No ceremony, no preamble. She just said, "I thought I wouldn't find anyone else. But I was wrong. There are more people like you, Caleb. They're not famous. They're not on the news." But they stopped. Caleb was silent for a moment, then asked, "So, what do you want to do with them?" Eleanor answered, "I want to name them. Not to make them stand out, but to remind the world they exist." And from that, an idea took form. The Silent Wall. The Silent Wall was a digital platform. No profile pictures, no filters, no ads. Just one question at the top of the page. Who is someone who once stopped for you? And a blank box to fill in. No character limit, no login required, no email needed. Within 48 hours of launching, it had over 12,000 submissions. Each story appeared like a brick on a digital wall, a monument built from compassion. No one stood out more than another. The man who handed out water and the person who saved a life appeared in the same font, same size. Eleanor printed the entire list into a thick binder. She brought it to Caleb's office, handed it to him, and said, "I can't choose who's most deserving, but I can choose who was the first to believe they were." Caleb flipped through each page, reading every line, some names in all caps, some misspelled, some entries simply reading, "The man who stood at the corner of Lexington last year." But all were people who had helped without anyone watching. Not long after, Eleanor proposed a bold policy. All future Caleb stations would never be named after anyone with titles, awards, or media presence. They would only bear the names of anonymous good souls, nominated by the community. The vetting process would be strict. No PR filters, no charity endorsements. Just a real story and one person to verify it. Each year, 5 new stations would be built, each one a living tribute to someone who had never been honored. Caleb was invited to chair the first nomination council. He declined the title, but agreed to serve simply as someone who was once named. He said nothing during the first meeting. He only read, and after the session, he wrote one sentence on the silent wall. "If you ever stopped, even once, then even if the world didn't see it, someone will always remember." It rained lightly that Saturday afternoon, the kind of rain that blurs windows but isn't enough to keep people off the streets. Caleb sat in the small living room of their second-floor apartment beside his mother, Helen. She was asleep, her breathing steady but slow, aided by an oxygen machine that clicked softly every 4 seconds like a metronome. The room glowed gently under the desk lamp's light, which shone onto an old photo hanging on the wall. Young Caleb in a striped shirt standing beside a rusty bicycle, grinning wide. Beneath it was a Christmas card from over a decade ago, handwritten by his mother. "You don't have to grow up to be kind. You just have to stop when someone needs you." Caleb picked up a blank sheet of paper, laid it on the table, and uncapped the pen he reserved only for signing important documents. He hadn't written a letter to his mother since he was 8, but this time, he wasn't writing because she needed to read it. He was writing because he needed to say it. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you'll ever read these words. Maybe you never will. Or maybe someday someone will read them to you. But I think if I don't write this today, I might forget how I felt when everything started to change. You know, I used to believe there were 2 kinds of people in this world, those who are seen and those who stand outside the light. I had accepted that I was the second kind. I never thought anyone would remember my name. Honestly, I never felt the need for it. But then, there was a woman I helped change a flat tire for on the side of the highway. You would have scolded me if you knew I was late for work that day, gave away half my last sandwich to a stranger, and lost nearly an hour under the midday sun. But Mom, that was the most beautiful hour of my life. That woman, you won't believe this, was a CEO. not the kind who's always on TV or giving speeches. She had lost her husband because no one stopped to help when his car slipped off the road. She spent 3 years afterward traveling highways, standing quietly by the roadside, just to see if anyone would stop. And I was the first. I didn't help her because she was a CEO. I helped because she was someone who needed help. I thought, if it were you standing there, I'd hope someone would do the same. I didn't do anything grand, I just changed a tire. But she told me, it's because you didn't ask for anything that everything changed. You know what? She built a roadside station and named it after me. I never imagined my name would be attached to something that big. But what moved me the most wasn't the big sign or the things people said. It was standing at that construction site, looking at the workers, and realizing they were building something for people like you. People who had been left behind. People who had no one to catch them when they fell. People who lived kindly, even when no one recognized it. You once said, kindness isn't an act, it's a reflex. I didn't fully understand that when I was young, but now I think I do. You taught me how to live without proving anything, how to help without making noise, how to look at someone and not ask who they are, but what they need. You didn't teach with words. You taught by the way you lived, by packing leftover food for the homeless, even when we only had half a box of rice, by helping a woman who had fallen at the gas station even though your back hurt for days after, by smiling at a cashier who gave you the wrong order. You stopped, not because you had much, but because you never believed you were too poor to give a little kindness. I chose my actions that day based on the way you lived, and now an entire system is changing because of it. You might not believe this, but from my name, they're building more rest stops, each named after someone who's never been recognized. People like you, people like Rosa, the janitor who saved a life, George, the old man who handed out water by the road, Alexis, the young woman who gave away her gloves in the snow. They were never called by name, but now they are the foundation. I don't need a title. I don't need to be a speaker. I just need to come home each night, place my hand on my chest, and know that you would be proud to see I'm still living by what you taught me. I want you to know I've never forgotten. I haven't forgotten the look in your eyes when you watched me wipe tables at age 7. I haven't forgotten what you said when I returned extra change someone gave me by mistake. You choose to be a person, not to take the win. I haven't forgotten the night you hugged me after I got rejected from a job interview and still said, they didn't see you, but I did. And now others see me too. Not because I wanted them to, but because I didn't hide what you gave me. I'm not writing this letter to thank you, because if I had to write a proper thank you to you, I'd be writing for the rest of my life. I'm writing to tell you that I still believe. I still believe in what you believed, that someone with no name can still change a system, that someone with no power can still open doors for others, and that sometimes just one person stopping is enough. Your son, Caleb. The grand opening of Caleb's station had no red carpet, no fireworks, no flashy background music or media microphones. The sky was slightly overcast that day, with gray clouds drifting as if hesitant, and the wind gently tugged at shirt hems each time someone stepped out of their car. The once barren ground had been paved with a smooth gray stone, non-slippery, non-glare. The entrance was simply a wooden frame with a deeply carved message. We stop because someone is waiting. Caleb arrived 30 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. He stood at the corner of the lot, wearing a gray button-up shirt and plain jeans. No tie, no name tag. Eleanor arrived shortly after, quietly standing beside him for a moment. She didn't make an announcement, didn't urge him to step onto a stage. She simply said, "They're waiting inside." Caleb turned, nodded slightly, and walked in. The main hall of Caleb's station didn't look like a typical ribbon-cutting room. No leather chairs, no podium. Each person sat on a small wooden chair, like those found in old libraries. They were community representatives, doctors, teachers, truck drivers, delivery folks, stay-at-home mothers. No one famous, no one dressed in designer clothes. But they all had one thing in common. They had once stopped for someone. Eleanor began the ceremony by inviting a silver-haired man to read aloud the names engraved on the first silent wall. Each name was read, Not alphabetically, not by fame, but in the order of the moments they had acted. Caleb sat in the back row. He said nothing. He needed to say nothing, because his very presence was already an answer. After the reading, the large glass doors opened. Behind them was a wide courtyard where a round bronze plaque had been placed. It showed no pictures, only one engraved line. This place is for those who help without needing to know who you are. Below that was a second line. Caleb Station, 001. There was no applause, no chants, only a silence that expanded, not from a lack of words, but because everyone understood that here, words didn't need to be loud. Caleb stepped forward and touched the bronze plaque. The coolness on his fingertips spread gently into his chest, not painfully, but just enough to bring back the memory of that afternoon on the highway, bending over a flat tire, unaware that the act would change his entire life. Eleanor stood a few steps behind. She didn't push forward. She just watched. And for the first time in years, she cried. Not from old grief, but because a place once defined by death had become a place of life. 1 week after the launch, Caleb Station welcomed its first visitors. No one knew their names. No one filmed them. But each day, over 200 people passed through. Some asked for water. Some just needed a seat for 10 minutes. Some left behind handwritten thank you notes. Eleanor read everyone. Caleb didn't. He just checked the water tank, the benches, and the first aid box. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Caleb was tidying the waiting room when he noticed a young girl about 12 years old standing by the bookshelf. She didn't speak, just held up an old comic book and asked, "Is Caleb a real person?" Caleb smiled. "What do you think?" She whispered, "Dad said you were the one who stopped the car, even when no one else did." Sounds like a superhero. Caleb sat beside her, placed a hand on the book and said, "If there is a real superpower, it's the ability to see others as human, not as a burden." She didn't fully understand, but she smiled, and that was enough. That night, Eleanor added a line to The Silent Wall. One rest stop doesn't change society, but one rest stop can change a person, and sometimes that's enough. The line was shared over 40,000 times in 3 days, but Caleb didn't know. He was cleaning the windows. At the end of the first month, Eleanor held a private meeting in the small room behind Caleb's station. There, she unfolded a map and pointed out 9 more locations for future stations. Each one was tied to a name. Not a celebrity, not a leader, just someone who had once stopped. Caleb sat to her left, holding a pen, not writing, but his eyes quietly recorded everything. A journalist once asked Eleanor in her final interview, "Why didn't you name the station after your husband, the man who died because no one stopped for him?" She replied, "Because Richard doesn't need to be remembered by name. He's remembered by the fact that I refused to let anyone else go through what he did." Caleb's station became a model, but Caleb never became a public figure. He turned down book deals, declined talk show invites, rejected every brand sponsorship offer. He kept only one thing, the handwritten sign at the station entrance, written by Eleanor herself. "We stopped. Not because we knew who you were, but because you needed someone to stop." And if you're watching this video, maybe you've stopped too. Maybe you once helped someone when no one else did. Maybe you did the right thing while everyone else looked away. We want you to know this. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. There is a place in this world, a stop not just for cars, but for kindness. And maybe one day, a new station will carry your name. And if you believe the world needs more stops like this, more stories like this, more quiet heroes like Caleb, then please like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it, because sometimes a single like or a simple share is also a way of stopping for someone. And who knows, maybe you will be the reason someone out there no longer feels invisible.